podcast. My name is John Halim, aka John the Podcaster. I'm so glad you're back. I'm so glad that we're back. This is a really exciting episode for me. This story is like nothing you've ever heard before. It's a crazy story about how a young man came to this country, the United States, on foot at the age of 9 years old from El Salvador. If you're watching on YouTube, unfortunately, there is no video for this episode. Uh, at the time when I recorded it, I thought it was going to be strictly on podcasts. I didn't really think it through that this was eventually going to be on YouTube. I'm sorry. So if you're on YouTube, what you can do is basically let it play and have fun doing something else while you listen. If you want to stare at a blank screen, by all means. And I'm also going to have subtitles on here, so if you can't really listen to it, but you want to go through the conversation and read it, there are going to be subtitles, so you can check that out. However you want to consume this, again, I'm sorry that there's no video here. Going forward with the rest of the interviews, I'm going to try to have video content. In Fabricio's case also, it may not have been the best way to go because he is kind of shy about this whole hi Fabricio. He's kind of shy about this whole thing. Like, he didn't even want to share on his social media the hype to the show. He didn't really want to share that. So I don't really want to pressure him into something he's not comfortable with. But the story, nonetheless, is very important to listen to. I think if you are following the whole immigration story in the United States, even if you're not, even if you just want to hear an interesting story and kind of think about someone else's situation, that's I mean, this is for you as well. So without further ado, here is episode 1 of The Immigrant Experience. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Last Moderate podcast. Again, I am John Halim. I want to welcome you guys back to the show. With me today is a very special guest on the very first episode of The Immigrant Experience. I want to welcome Mr. Fabricio Martinez. Fabricio, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and the culture and everything like that. But first, before all that, tell us where you're from, or tell us what you're up to now.
Well, I'm 22. I'm currently a senior systems executive at a company in the D.C. area. I am from El Salvador, and I arrived in the U.S. in 2006.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about El Salvador. Tell us a little bit about the culture, the way of life there, and how things are.
So I experienced two separate things in El Salvador. Where I was born, I grew up in the mountains, so there was no communication with other people a lot. So there was no water system, electricity, none roads, none of that, no cars. So I grew up really close to my family, where my father built a water system from the mountain. The water would flow down to our house, and that way we could wash clothes. The bathroom was like 10 minutes away. You would walk to it. It would just be a giant hole on the ground where you
sorry to interrupt you. The bathroom was 10-minute walk away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you really had to go,
I mean, you would have to
book it.
Yeah, you had to.
Wow.
And, because since it's just a giant hole in the ground, it kind of smelled, so you didn't want that near your house. Like, the house was made out of mud, and you kind of cover it with, like, a wallpaper so you wouldn't notice it. If it would start falling apart, my mom would go to a location where the mud would turn white, get it from there, and kind of patch up the holes on the wall. That's kind of the first section of my life in El Salvador. The second, I moved to my grandmother when my parents immigrated to the U.S. My mom came first. My dad couldn't take care of me, so he took me to my grandmother's. And there it was more city-like. It was electricity at that point. It was running water, but you would have to pay it separately. It was more people interacted with you. It was more accessible. But again, it was different because I wasn't with my family. I was with my grandparents. I wasn't directly with my parents. And I had to adjust to, going to school. Before, we would take 45 minutes to walk to school, to 2 hours if it was raining. Here, a bus will pick us up because my mom was paying for a private school. So everything changed a little bit.
Okay. And so, culturally, in El Salvador, how are things different than they are here?
I would say it's more family oriented.
In El Salvador?
So, yeah, in El Salvador compared to here. Because here, at 18, at 20, people start thinking, hey, I'm going to move out from home. I got to go find my own job, find my own place. And here, for the first time I heard, of homes where elderly go, and the kids kind of put them there and they get taken care of. In El Salvador, the young take care of the elder. No matter what, that's kind of a thing, and you're responsible for their health. You're responsible to work and bring money so that they're okay at home because they took care of you when you were younger. So that's the generational thing here that I found different in our cultures. Also, over there, men are expected to work and women are expected to stay at home. For example, my mom stayed at home. She took care of us. She did the laundry, she cooked, she did everything at home, and my dad worked all the time. Sometimes he was gone for 3 to 4 days because his job required it and he wouldn't show up. But that was normal over there. Here, it's kind of both parties.
Got it. And what did your dad do for a living, if you don't mind me asking?
So in El Salvador, my dad, when he grew up, he was a farmer, and he taught himself how to read and write. So he began working for the government when I was a little bit before I was born. So he will give shots to children and animals to prevent rabies, to prevent flus from El Salvador. He will also put poison on like bamboo sticks so the mosquitoes wouldn't be able to grow in them. He did a lot of health-related jobs that require him to travel all over the place, which meant that he would be away from home for 3 days to a week.
Okay, and did he have like any medical training or?
He got trained on the job. So, based on what he told me, he was taken to a school and they did like a written test, and it was 5 people, and the person with the highest score was the one that got hired, and because nobody knew how to write or read, only about 3 people showed up, and he had the highest score. And then after that, he got trained.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, just a picture there of poverty and definitely some hardship. What type of hardships did your family experience?
Well, my family has gone through a lot in El Salvador. My grandfather was murdered during the Civil War. My dad was about 18, and my grandfather supported his entire family. So after that, my dad took the mantle and kind of raised all his 9 siblings. He paid for food, he paid for everything. After that, my mom and him got together. I was born. He had to make a decision, leave his family and support his own family, which he did, and in turn, his family kind of hit their back on him. When I was 3, for example, I saw my dad get a gun put to his head by his own brother, telling him to leave the land. Just because their family was going through hardships as well, so they were fighting for land. But my dad decided, this isn't worth it. That's when my mom decided to immigrate to the U.S. My father took me to to my grandparents, and they raised me for a bit. He would work and then come see me during the weekends. But that spread out for about a year. So I only saw my father during the weekends because I knew he was working and my mom was in the U.S. At the time, I didn't know it because when she left my sister. She put my sister to sleep and she's like, I'll be right back. And then she looked at me and she was like, just wait for me. And then she left and I didn't see her for like 4 years.
Okay, and so she just left and went to the U.S.?
Yep.
Okay. And so you were on your own, basically?
Yeah, with my grandparents at that time. And then maybe a year after that, my dad came to see me, and he told me, I'm going to go after your mom to see if I can support you guys better. And he quit his job and immigrated to the U.S., and I didn't see them for maybe 3 to 4 years, and which turned into kind of a bigger issue because my grandparents were taking care of me, but they were elderly as well. So my aunt took over, and she didn't have the best way to treat us. So, which means that she didn't go to school, she didn't graduate from high school, she didn't do anything because there was no opportunity over there. My mom was 17 when she left the 3rd grade. So my aunt, the only way people sometimes over there know how to take care of others.
So sorry, I just want to backtrack here. Your mom was 17 when your aunt was in the 3rd grade.
No, my mom was 17 when she was in the 3rd grade. That's how.
So your mom was 17 years old when she graduated the 3rd grade.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that because for us, most of you guys listening are in the U.S. Of course. Maybe I know a few of you guys are in Europe. We don't think of somebody being 17 years old in the third grade, and that just kind of goes to show you guys, the difference here of what we're talking about and why someone like Fabricio and his family ended up coming to the United States. I'm not going to really cut you off more than that, but just after clarifying that point, I think you were talking about your aunt when we got there.
So the only way my aunt knew of to take care of us and to get us to go to school and stuff was beatings. So for 3 to 4 years, my sister and I were beaten a lot by our aunt. And it was extremely bad because my parents didn't know, and she didn't want them to know, but she didn't know of any other way. She couldn't teach us how to read or write or do anything because she didn't go to school. So once it took about 3 to 4 years for my parents to find out, because one of their cousins came to El Salvador, saw what was happening to us, and went back to the U.S. and told my parents. So at the age of 9, and my sister was 7, and my little cousin was 5, I believe, they decided to pay for a coyote, which is the person that takes us across the borders.
Well, but before we get into that, because I think that's kind of going to be, the highlight of your story there. But when your mom left and your dad left, did you guys have any contact with them?
We used to write letters.
Okay, so it was just snail mail and kind of hoping it got there.
Yeah, pretty much, because phone calls were getting pretty expensive, and then El Salvador passed this law where apparently it was a tax on calls from the U.S. where a major part of the money was taken to fix the roads. That was what we were told. So one $5 call would lead to 3 minutes of a phone call.
Wow.
Yeah, so letters were the best way. My dad and my mom used to write us letters, and we would write them letters. Maybe about a year ago, my mom found a letter that I wrote to her when I was little.
Wow. Okay. And so, in El Salvador, we hear a lot about the gangs.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any experience with the gangs? And and just to give listeners who don't know about this a little background, the infamous gang MS-13, which you guys hear President Trump talking about a lot. They originate from El Salvador. Well, their origination point is a point of contention, but it's widely agreed upon that they come from El Salvador. So, Fabricio, tell us a little bit about your experience with the gangs in El Salvador.
So, my experience is a little unique in a way because I've kind of talked to my father a lot about this. So, for example, I told you my grandfather was murdered in El Salvador. My father was tortured in front of my grandfather. My grandfather was electrocuted in front of my dad. My father was burnt and everything by the El Escuadrón de la Muerte, or the Death Squadron, that was supported by the government of El Salvador. There was a lot of deaths and casualties from innocent people at the time. And then eventually the Salvadorian government with the militias came to an understanding. They were like, we're going to cease the war at this point. So all these death squadrons, all these people that were trained by, like, let's say CIA, government supported, they were left without a job. And they were trained to kill. I mean, these were people that were trained to kill. These were children that were taken from their families, that were their only job and purpose in the world was to kill. So when that happened and all the guns were turned in, they didn't know what to do with anything else. So they were a huge part of building this MS-13. We lived in a really remote area. There wasn't a lot of issues because it was really hard for people to get to where we lived. But where my grandparents are and where gangs did build up over time. And at one point, there was a letter that was left at the doorstep. I was here already, where they put a cross on top of the page and a cross at the bottom of the page. And they put both my cousin's name and my grandfather's name on it. And then they received a call saying, we need $3,000 by this date, or you know what will happen. And then that means that one of the people listed on that list will get killed. And that was one of our experiences. And it's gotten so bad that when I went to El Salvador maybe 2 years ago, or 1 year and a half ago, the military for a second thought that maybe we were doing something sketchy near my uncle's grave, that I had an M16 pointed at my forehead, maybe like a foot away. And the military man and I didn't say a single word to each other. He just realized that I was building a grave, so he just kind of went away and walked away, and nothing was ever said.
Wow, that's definitely a something that makes you think, and is kind of harrowing there. Your parents went to the U.S. first. What was it about the United States that made them decide that that's where they wanted to go?
Well, they already have family here. So my mom's brother came over maybe 40 years ago, and he emigrated here. My grandmother sold all her land and to save the money to bring him over, illegally, of course. And so he was here already. And then 30 years ago, my second uncle came over. And then a little bit after, my third uncle came over. And then so my mom already had family here. And they saved money to bring my mom over to the U.S. as well. That was really why they chose the U.S. and not another country.
Okay, and so where you left off in your story is when it was you, your sister, and your cousin preparing to leave to the United States. Tell us a little bit about before you left. What was it as a result of how you were being treated by your aunt? Or was that just part of it? Was it just life as a whole? What was that moment where the decision was made that we're leaving, we're going to the U.S.?
My parents made the decision because, like you said, the way my aunt was treating me, there was a lot. The violence was starting to escalate a lot. Poverty was getting worse, but also my parents hadn't seen us. There's a huge portion of our childhood where we were not with them, and to this day it still affects us because I see a lot of families say, their kids tell their dad, "I love you," or my mom or their mom, "I love you," but that connection isn't there between my family and my sister, me, and my parents. And it's, we know that we love each other, but we can't say it, and we don't know why, but that our parents brought us over because at that point it had been too long that we had been separated from them, and they thought that we might have a better future here because, in all honesty, if they had never brought us here, we would probably be dead at this point.
Yeah, that's insane, man. So let's talk about the beginning of the journey. So your parents sent money to the coyotes, coyotes for us gringos. Tell us a little bit about the coyotes and what they do and how your parents got in touch with them, so on and so forth. Kind of give us an idea of how that works.
So I've never gotten into much detail with my parents about it, but it's a built-in network. You kind of just know who the coyote is, and you that I understand the agreement they have with my parents was they will pay half of it when we started the trip, and then they will pay the other half once the trip ended for us. And that was all I really heard about it during the time. All I know is that my aunt came in, told me in 3 days you're gonna go see your parents. I never realized that I was going to a whole entire different country. I never realized that I was going to not see my grandparents for the next 12 years. And she kind of just took us to all the stores. We began shopping. We were looking for shoes. We were looking for clothes. We were looking for backpacks. Not too many things though, because we will be walking a lot. The only shoes they have for kids they had these little lights on them. You probably remember where you would just take a step and they would light up. We had to cut all those out just because we would walk at night. So that was the purpose behind it.
So you're saying that a lot of your journey to the United States was on foot from El Salvador?
Yeah. A lot of my journey was on foot at night most of the time.
Okay, and it was you, your sister, and your cousin. How old were you guys?
So I was 9. It was December, and I was turning 10 in April. My sister was 7 at the time, and my cousin was 5.
Okay, so children.
Yeah.
And no adult supervision from your family, anything?
No, none at all.
Just trusting you with random people who they hoped would get you here safely.
Yeah.
Wow. So walk us through the journey. The morning comes or the night comes when you're leaving El Salvador. Tell us about the journey step by step.
So I think I left my home around noon. I can't remember the day exactly. My grandparents took us, and it was all three of us, me, my sister, and my little cousin. And they bought us a meal, and this is the last meal I remember because it was made out of avocado, and I never had it before, and I've never had it again. But it was extremely good, and I've been trying to find it for the longest, but I can never find it. So they took us across Guatemala because they have open borders. And they took us to this home that was made out of sticks. It was like mixed bamboo sticks mixed with something else. It was, I mean, if the wind came, it would blow it away. And it was around 3 a.m, and my grandmother was crying, I remember. And I didn't really know why, but she said, just go with what they tell you. You know, take care of your sister, take care of your cousin. And then we started a trip. And my grandparents stayed in the little house, and we crossed. There was a river right next to the house, and we crossed the river walking. And they told us, it was like, okay, whenever we cross a river, you have to hold hands and hold on to somebody else, because if not, the river will take you, and it's slippery. So that was our first, 10 minutes into the trip. We were already being warned about that. And I never realized that. In the back of my head, I was like, why are not my grandparents coming? But a little bit later, it kind of kicked in, we have to do this, And that was the beginning of my trip into Guatemala. There's also, I don't know how much further into detail you want me to get, or if you had any more questions.
Please tell us everything.
Okay, so there was that first river. When the sun was rising, there was a truck waiting for us, kind of in a really grassy patch, and we just got on it, and they drove us to like a hotel, and we changed clothes to look like we were from Guatemala, kind of to kind of
blend in.
Yeah, blend in, and I, put ourselves out there, and they took us to a river, and this is one of the things I remember the most because they have giant tires, and they put wood on top of it, and then this person they sit you on top of the wood, and you pay the person maybe 25 cents at the time. And this person pulls those tires across the river, but he walks on the river. So all you see is him sink into the water, and the water is extremely dirty. You cannot see anything. And he just keeps walking underwater for about 3 minutes. And then you see his head come back out, and then he keeps pulling you to the other side of the river. And I have no idea how they do this. But to me, that was, I just couldn't. I still remember it clearly, and for 25 cents, that was their living, And they knew that we were trying to immigrate to the U.S., so they made a living out of that. Guatemala wasn't, not a lot happened in Guatemala. We stayed in hotels during the day, and during the night, we did most of the walking.
And so when we say hotels, we're not talking about like the Marriott or anything like that. No. Tell us a little bit about the hotels.
So the hotels were really random. Sometimes they didn't even have beds or anything. They just were rooms where you would go and change. Or sometimes we stayed at homes where other families were staying. And for example, the third house we stayed at in Guatemala, there was a family with a little baby. And they told me I had to clean the outside of the house, so I was cleaning out the leaves. And they told my sister, come help me change the baby's diaper. And my sister was like, I don't know how to. And they were like, well, I'm going to show you, because in the future later on, you're going to have to know how to do this for your own kids. So they were like, and this might help you get distracted from all what's going on. Because it was just a point where people would arrive and then go on their own, to the next checkpoint. It was basically an underground railroad. The whole thing is an underground railroad where everyone knows where the checkpoint is, but we just have to trust that nothing will happen to that checkpoint.
Okay. And so you're staying at the hotels, these shacks, these places along the road. What happens next?
You just wait for the coyote. It's not just one person that will bring you over. Every checkpoint has a new coyote on it, and they will take you to the next checkpoint. They await the signal from the next checkpoint to say it's clear, you're good to go. Sometimes if there are police checkpoints in between, if you're taking a car or something, they do a scan before to make sure that there are no police checkpoints, and then they wait for that signal. Sometimes it's just a call, and if it rings twice, it's a good, you can go ahead. If it doesn't ring at all, don't go. The signals is up to them to decide, but that's basically how we did it.
Okay, and again, this is on foot.
Yeah, and okay. I remember only getting on a car maybe 3 times.
Okay, and so is that kind of where it ends in Guatemala?
Yeah, Guatemala was pretty easy, just because El Salvador and Guatemala are next to each other, so they have open borders. It's not the biggest thing. Mexico, crossing into Mexico was a little rougher because they took us on a bus, and I had to pretend to be asleep, but I could see the police officer coming on the window. I could see his reflection, and then he tapped me 3 times, but I didn't wake up just because I had to pretend to be asleep. Because if he asked me questions, I wouldn't know what to answer, and I wouldn't have the documentation. So he let me sleep, and the lady that was taking me pretended to be my grandmother. So that's how I got into Mexico with my sister and my cousin. And they took us. The first checkpoint in Mexico was a house that it was really, the walls were really high, and I remember they probably had around 300 birds on this wall, just on cages. And I have no idea how they fed them or anything. But the house, the entire day, you would just hear parrots and everything just chirping all day long. So
are these like, it's like that the homeowners' pets, or are like these like illegal birds that they're selling, or?
I wouldn't know actually. I just remember there was a lot of birds. That's a good question. I don't think they will keep that many for fun.
So I want to backtrack to the bus. Is the bus like where everyone in your kind of envoy is, or let's backtrack even further than that. So the Coyote, do they take a whole group of people, or was it just you, your sister, and your cousin?
It depends. So it depends on how. Sometimes it would just be my sister, my cousin, and me, and the person would pretend to be our dad or somebody or a relative. Sometimes it will be a group. It was just really up to what the checkpoint and what the Coyote was willing to do at that time.
Okay, so you're at the house in Mexico with all the birds and the big walls. What happens next? You actually, with all those big walls, you sure it wasn't Donald Trump's house?
Maybe it might have been.
I'm just trying to make this a little lighthearted for the folks who are really tuned into your story here, because this is actually something that we don't hear a lot. We don't really know, and that's the reason why we have this series, is because people don't really know what someone goes through to get here, and I think it's important to get that story out. So you're at the house in Mexico. What happens next?
So that I remember, they gave us a meal, and they told us that we're not going to have a meal for a while, so to eat a lot. And they gave us this really spicy soup, and my sister couldn't eat it because it was too spicy. So for some reason, I thought that it was smart to pour an entire bottle of salt on her soup, and it would make it less spicy. I don't remember why I did this, but I got in trouble with the person for that, because then that soup went in the trash. But I remember they got us on a truck. So this was maybe the last vehicle that we got on. And they drove us the entire day. And we got stopped by the cops 3 times. But each time they would just bribe the cops. Like, here goes, let us go. And they were like, okay, they're good, go. And it worked all 3 times. But sometimes you don't get so lucky. Sometimes the cop cannot be bribed. And at that point, you get caught, and then you get sent back home, and you got to start all over again. So they drove us for maybe a day or so, if I can remember right, to the next checkpoint. And this is where it gets a little hazy, because they woke me up around 3, 4 in the morning. And they told us, they woke me up personally. And I was waking my sister up and my little cousin. I was like, hey, let's go. And they were like, no, it's just you. And I was like, no, they have to come with me. I'm taking care of them. And then they pulled me away from my sister. And I was like, no, stop. And then they were like, look, if they come with you, they might die. And then at that point, I was like, I had to make a decision. Do I fight it and I stay with them, or do I leave on my own? So I told my sister. She was half asleep. She probably doesn't remember. And I was like, take care of Melvin. And I went with the coyote, and I got split from my sister. And I didn't see her for the next 7 months probably. And that I know, my sister was taken through the border on a car. She hasn't told me a lot of details about after that. But the officer stopped them. The U.S. officer stopped them, and he went straight to my little cousin. And he was like, where are you going? He was like, I'm coming to the U.S. to see my mom. And at that point, he gave it away. So they were captured by the immigration authorities in the U.S. I believe it was in Texas. I can't really remember. And that was, I didn't know any of this. So on my side, they made us walk a few nights. And I was with a group of adults. And they kept telling us, if you get sick or something happens to you, we will have to leave you behind.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to part 1 of our journey with Fabricio. I do apologize for the poor audio quality. The room that we had our interview in was not really designed for audio recording, but I hope it wasn't really that distracting to you. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform in order to be the first to know when parts 2 and 3 of Fabricio's journey become available. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.